On today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, we're bringing in Jack Bond from Paramount Sports to talk about all types of bets, division, conference, individual awards, and point totals. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, September 29th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden and Locked On NHL, where we'll be covering all the preseason activities around the National Hockey League. So, Cats fans, this is a little bit of a different episode that I'm going to conduct today. It's really all about betting odds. And we spoke really about betting odds in individual segments in different shows a few weeks ago. But now we have somebody on the show who actually knows way more than I do about anything in relation to betting odds, and that is Jack Bond from Paramount Sports. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is one of the first Locked On episodes I've done this season for an NHL team that was actually pretty good last year. So I'm finally getting a chance to be optimistic about a team. I've talked about the Canadians and the Sharks and the Devils a couple of times in the last couple of weeks. So I'm excited to actually get on and talk about some player props and some guys who might actually have some pretty good opportunities to win some trophies and some awards this year. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you once again. So I want to start off with division. So Atlantic Division has the Florida Panthers plus 200, Toronto 210, and Tampa Bay at 275. I always thought about it as the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be that team who are probably going to have kind of like a sprint through the regular season based on all the pressure that's going with their franchise, still not winning a first round series since 2004, kind of like how the Panthers were last year. I think we're definitely going to see a different Panthers team this year. But who do you see as far as the Atlantic Division champions, and who are you most willing to put your money on?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It seems like there's been a huge disparity in the Atlantic Division between regular season success and postseason success. You have the Panthers and you have the Maple Leafs, who have been putting up points and wins all regular season for the last couple of years, and they've been competitive. And then you have the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Boston Bruins, who have obviously been prominent in the postseason for the last decade plus. They're not necessarily winning the division every year. So this year, obviously this is probably one of the toughest divisions in recent memory in the NHL. This Atlantic Division, you've got three teams whose season point totals are projected over 100, and then you've got a fourth team who's at 95.5. So obviously a tough division. I would hate to be, the Montreal Canadiens or the Ottawa Senators this year. If I had to pick one team that I think could win the division this year, just based on the value, I'd probably go with the Lightning at plus 275. I know that's not going to make very many listeners or viewers happy, but there was so much turnover with the Panthers this offseason. You lose Mackenzie Weegar, you lose Jonathan Huberdeau, you bring in Matthew Tkachuk and bring in several more and lose several more. It could take them some time to mesh. Now, the Panthers do have 9 of their first 12 games against non-playoff teams from last season, so maybe it isn't too much of an issue. We've already talked about the regular season success for the Maple Leafs and the Panthers the last couple of years, and then the struggles in the postseason. All you got to do for this bet is to come out on top at the end of the regular season. I just think that the the difference between the Panthers, the Maple Leafs, and the Lightning, any difference in competitiveness or how good the team is this year is going to be minuscule. So, it's a bit of simple logic, but if you can get the Lightning at plus 275 after the recent history of that team, I think that's where the value is. Do I think they're going to win it for sure? No. If I did, I think they'd have higher odds. But I think if you're just looking for some value and a team I'd be interested in laying almost 3-1 odds on, I think I'd go with the Bolts in that one.
Mm-hmm. And that really, for the way I view that, is more like a reputation kind of pick for Tampa Bay, because the fact that they have been there before. The point totals have them as far as their over under at 103.5, the Panthers at 105.5, and the Toronto Maple Leafs at 107.5. So over under for those three specifically. I want to get your thoughts on all three of those teams.
Yeah, if I were betting on the Panthers this year, if I had one team specific future on the Panthers this year, I'd be taking that 105.5. I mean, that projection after last year at 122 points, they probably won't replicate 122 points, but a 17-point drop-off from 122 points last year to around 105 this year seems pretty steep to me. Obviously, you've got a tough division, but if I recall correctly, the Panthers played this Atlantic Division pretty well last year, especially at home. I mean, they played everybody well at home last year. So, I'd take the over on the Panthers there. I see no issue in thinking that these three teams are just going to beat up on everybody inside and outside of their own division. They could just be a gauntlet getting through that Atlantic this year, but that's not to say that there's going to be huge point drop-offs for any of these three teams. So if I had to take an over or an under on those point totals, I'd lean towards the over on the Panthers. I'd lean towards the over on the Lightning. I'd probably take the under on 107.5 for the Leafs. I just have so many questions about the goaltending situation and the defensive situation. It seems like every year there are one or two stretches of 7 to 10, maybe even 15 games where this Leafs team is all of a sudden giving up 4.5 goals a game. And now that they've been without Frederik Andersen, but they switch over goaltenders from last year. Matt Murray is supposed to come in and be some integral part of their goaltending situation this year. I've been watching Matt Murray for the last 3 or 4 years. I just don't think he has it. Maybe he played too many games young in his career, early in his career with the Penguins, getting to those cups. But I just don't think he's going to be some saving grace for them this year. And the defensive group as well. Did they really shore it up enough? I don't know. You got an older Jake Muzzin, an older Mark Giordano. I just don't see it. If they're going to keep playing this run and gun style of play, you need to have a solid number one goaltender back there. I just don't see it. I think I'd take the under there on the Toronto Maple Leafs at 107.5. That's pretty high in my opinion.
Which means you're definitely going over for Tampa Bay at 103.5, since you said that the chances are you like them to win the division. Let's go to conference. It has the Leafs as the favorite at 450, which I'm not ready to. I wouldn't be ready to put something there. But the team that I think is ready to take that next step, as far as possibly even making it to the Stanley Cup final, that's not the Florida Panthers, is I was thinking the Carolina Hurricanes. I saw them in that top three. What are your thoughts about placing a bet on Carolina winning the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I'm certainly not placing a bet on a team with Ilya Samsonov and Matt Murray as their goaltending duo. I think it's like you mentioned, a reputation play on Toronto to be the Eastern Conference favorites. The NHL has recently really started to embrace sports betting, and Toronto obviously has one of the biggest markets in hockey. So I think that's part of it. I do like the Carolina Hurricanes. I think they are virtually, I hate to use the term, but they're virtually a lock to win that Metro division, in my opinion. I think they're light years ahead of the New York Rangers, at least as far as the regular season goes. And just my outlook on this coming season. I mean, Brent Burns and Max Pacioretty, well, really Brent Burns in particular, he might be past his prime, but that's still a good defenseman. And even if he's not a great defenseman or an elite defenseman anymore, he's not expected to be the number one there. They have a Pesce, they have a Brett Pesce, they have a Jacob Slavin, they have talent up and down the defensive group. in Carolina. And so he can step in and be a power play specialist, or he can step in and be, just a fourth or fifth defenseman there. That's a pretty darn good fourth or fifth defenseman, maybe the best in the NHL. And then you've got a Max Pacioretty to come in and be, he's for sure going to be part of the top six when he's healthy, recovering from the surgery right now. This team has consistent goaltending, at least in the regular season. It seems like they're one of those teams who, at least the way their structure is formed in the postseason, one bad goal can kind of determine a series for them. With some more veteran presence like those two guys and just another year of Sebastian Aho and Teuvo Teravainen, I think they can right that a little bit. I do think they could represent the East in the Stanley Cup. If I had to put money today on one team to win the Eastern Conference, I'd say it'd probably be Carolina. I mean, plus 650 for what we can all presume is going to be the Metro Division champion. You're not going to get anywhere near those odds come March or April, when they're probably 7 to 10 points up on their counterparts in the Metro. I'd also be interested in the Pittsburgh Penguins at 12-1. I just feel like every postseason, as long as they're healthy to an extent, they can make a run. I'd say, if you want to, you could throw a couple of bucks on them at 1,200 or at plus 1,200. $100 wins you $1,200, or $10 wins you 120. That's pretty good odds right there if I just had to pick kind of a long shot. But yeah, overall, I definitely agree with Carolina. I think they should probably be slight favorites to win the Eastern Conference this year.
So with the Panthers being second in those odds, what kind of since it is a Panthers centric show, what do you think of the Panthers and their chances?
Well, I'll start with this. I am one of the bigger Paul Maurice fans out there. I think he did a fantastic job managing the Jets back in kind of the late 2010s when they were really competitive for the Western Conference. And I thought he did the right thing in stepping down last season when apparently he just felt that the locker room wasn't responding to him anymore. He has a stacked roster this year, obviously, probably the most talented he's ever had. I guess the big question mark is whether or not he can lean on Sergei Bobrovsky as the number one, just like Andrew Burnett did last year. Bob had one of his best seasons of his career last year, but he started 53 games, which is obviously the most he's had since 2018, 2019. Back in 2018, 2019, he was only 30 years old. He was kind of in the prime of his career. Can he do that again at 34, especially knowing the inconsistencies he's had in his career as a goaltender? I don't think it will be a problem. It's something to monitor. But, if you're going down the list of NHL teams and you're kind of pointing out one big X factor or one big question mark, I think that might be the one for the Panthers. But I would also put it, on a scale of severity or level of concern, I think I would put it near a 1 or a 2 out of 10, right? I'm not too concerned about that. So really, like I said, but aside from Bobrovsky, there's not a ton of question marks on this roster coming into the season. Aaron Ekblad's back. The forward group seems to be replenished, if not even better this year. I'm sure we'll get into the big trade from the offseason at some point, because I do have some thoughts about Matthew Tkachuk this year. Maybe you worry a little bit about the defensive depth with Lucas Carlson and Mark Stahl back there. I don't think that's a great bottom two or part of your bottom four. But again, for this team, it all comes down to the postseason. I was talking to somebody who's a Minnesota Wild fan yesterday, and I put those two kind of in the same category, just with the Wild in the Western Conference. This team can put up 100 to 110 to 115 regular season points all they want to, but I don't think the fan base is going to be satisfied until they win at least one, if not 2 or 3 playoff series. So if I'm just looking at betting on this Panthers team, I feel like it's almost overlooked coming into this season. This team broke records with their offensive performance last year. They put up more goals per game than any team since the 1995 Penguins, I believe. It's just, that's not what they're going for. They're not going for offensive accolades. They're going for a Stanley Cup, if not an Eastern Conference banner, down there at BB&T Arena. So if I'm betting this team, and I'm one of the more conservative bettors you might meet. I'm not going to be throwing my money all over the board. I don't have to have a future on every single team going into every year. If I am betting anything, though, I'm taking that over 105.5 points in the regular season. You just have to prove it to me that you can be successful in the postseason before I'm going to start taking the Eastern Conference or the Stanley Cup odds preseason. If they pulled something like the Carolina Hurricanes did in the offseason and picked up 2 veterans like that, maybe maybe I'd consider it, but it just seems like they're going to have to prove it to me, win 1 or 2 playoff series before I can start betting on them to win the Stanley Cup. So I'd stick with the over 105.5 regular season points for now.
Yeah, and 26 years of not winning a playoff series until just recently. And now for the Panthers, it's trying to get out of that second round and go even further than that. So if people don't bet on them winning the Eastern Conference, it makes perfect sense for someone who wants to be on the safer side of betting. But we're going to continue. Go ahead.
Well, that's right. And I wanted to mention one more thing. You know, I was looking through the BetOnline odds today, and they have a pretty interesting prop up there. They have odds up there on who's going to win the President's Trophy. The Panthers won it last year. I couldn't tell you the last time we had a repeat winner or a back-to-back winner of the President's Trophy, but they're plus 750 to win the President's Trophy. And if you want to bet with your heart as a Panthers fan, you could take that maybe instead of the over 105.5. Again, there was a lot of turnover, but it wasn't necessarily bad turnover in the offseason. So if you're looking for maybe a longer shot and you're like me and you're a little bit cautious about betting on them to win the Cup or the Eastern Conference, maybe look at them to win the President's Trophy at plus 750. I want to make sure you guys are aware of those bets as well.
Mm-hmm. A lot of Panther fans have some superstitions about President's Trophy, about the curse. But if they win the President's Trophy again, it's whatever. Just go out and win. Just get out on the ice and just go win a cup. If they win it, so I was celebrating when they first won it, staying up on the game number 81. But if they win it, it's going to be less of a celebration. It's going to be more business-like for the Panthers when they get to the postseason. So it's not going to be as much of a celebration this time. It's just, hey, get to work and bring the cup to sunrise. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss individual awards and individual point totals for some certain Florida Panthers players. But first, we're going to tell you all about BetOnline. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, and podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you could find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net and use your mobile device today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Second segment here on this special edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It's a betting episode where I have Jack Bond from Paramount Sports here. And Jack, so Hart Trophy. So of course the favorites out there are Connor McDavid's of the world, the Austin Matthews, Igor Shesterkin is up there, Alexander Barkov, a 22-1 odds to win the Hart. The last season could have been in contention had it not been for an injury, missing 15 games. Was at a 110-point pace for the Panthers, and Matthew Tkachuk, 104 points, 40 goals score, 50-1. Who do you think is the safest bet to win the Hart, and who would you possibly who would you possibly stay away from to win the Hart as well?
Yeah, well, if you're just looking league wide at any possible bet on the Hart Trophy, I don't necessarily say I would stay away from it personally, but I am interested to see Cale Makar at 14-1 to win the award. I can't remember the last time I saw a defenseman that high on the Hart Trophy odds before the season. He's up there between Nikita Kucherov and Kirill Kaprizov for the Hart Trophy odds. So that's pretty wild to me. I don't necessarily know that I would bet on him to win the Hart Trophy personally when you've got a Nate McKinnon and a Gabe Landeskog and all the talent that Colorado has. I think that if there's anyone that I would for sure stay away from, it would be Makar. But even then, I could see the argument for him. Somebody who I was just kind of actually scrolling through these odds today, and I was really interested to see all the way down at 28-1 or plus 2,800 is Jack Eichel of the Vegas Golden Knights. Is at plus 2,800. There's a couple of reasons why I'm intrigued by that, and I might even make a play on that myself. One, he doesn't have the roster of stars that he used to, or quote unquote did for a hot minute in Vegas last year with Pacioretty and all these other guys that were there. But doesn't it feel like everybody's expecting the downfall of the Vegas Golden Knights to happen this year, and they're not going to compete? They didn't have a single player over a point per game last year. Jonathan Marchessault was a top scorer last year, and probably would be projected to be their top scorer this year, if not for Eichel. And he's not the household name that a Jack Eichel is. Obviously for the Hart Trophy, you've got to get the name recognition out there. You've got to be on a pretty recognizable market, if not a really competitive team. It seems like if this Panthers team if this Knights team can kind of overcome whatever this expectation is that they're going to fall apart this year, and they can maybe finish first or second in that Pacific Division and kind of surprise everybody and beat out Calgary or Edmonton for the division win, or maybe for second, you have to assume Jack Eichel is going to play a big part in that. We also have to assume he's healthy coming into this year. But when he is healthy, he's a potential 40-goal scorer. He's going to play top line minutes. He's going to play top power play minutes as well. And really once he started to settle in, I remember watching a nationally televised game when he made his official return to Vegas last year. And I think he took 2 or 3 penalties in the first period in that first game back. He didn't look too great. Really didn't look too great for his first 7 or 8 games back in the lineup. And then you look at the rest of the season, and he was almost on a point per game pace for a little bit over a point per game pace for the last 20, 25 games of the season. So I'm intrigued by that. I do like his odds. I think we've kind of quickly forgotten how talented he is. And he's still in Vegas. They've got the bright lights. They've got quite a bit of attention every year so far in their franchise's existence. I think he'd be an interesting bet at 28-1, as well as Cale Makar. If you really want to bet on a defenseman, I think I'd rather just take his odds to win the Norris, though. He's already got that locked up.
Mm-hmm. And I can understand why people might be writing off Jack Eichel because of how ugly the ending was in Buffalo, being stripped of the captaincy, the options for his back surgery, and then wondering what kind of shape he's going to come in. And Nolan Patrick's not going to play for the Vegas Golden Knights this year. Robin Leonard as well. Mark Stone started training camp with a non-contact jersey as well. So if we see the Vegas Golden Knights compete for a playoff spot and Jack Eichel's like in the middle leading it, most valuable, not always best player, most valuable, about what the difference you make for your team when you're on the ice versus not. So I that's actually real. I never actually thought about that for Jack Eichel. So next one is Vezina. Sergei Bobrovsky at 25-1 and Spencer Knight at 100-1. I'd say stay away from those odds for the Vezina Trophy. But one player that maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit for how he came out of the postseason last year. But I really like Jake Ottinger's chances at 20-1. What do you think about Jake Ottinger's chances of winning the Vezina, and who else would you sprinkle a little money on?
Yeah, I personally would stay away from the Bobrovsky Vezina odds as well, simply because if I remember correctly, the Panthers just signed Knight to a contract extension. They have all the reason in the world to start easing him into more starts. Another reason why, again, we've mentioned it, that's a record-breaking offense down there in South Florida that is certainly going to take some attention away from the goaltending. Even if Bobrovsky comes out and has another really solid year, maybe even a better year than last year, I just don't know that he will be the focal point of this Florida Panthers season. And that's not a bad thing. It just means he's probably not going to be in line for that Vezina Trophy. As far as a Jake Ottinger bet, I like the player. I think he's awesome. He reminds me, though, a bit, and maybe this isn't a bad thing, but in terms of betting on the Vezina, I think it should matter to some folks. He reminds me a little bit of a Thatcher Demko, where at least in terms of the national scene, he kind of came out of nowhere last year in the postseason with that performance against Calgary in the first round. But you look at his year last year, he still gave up over 2.5 goals per game. His GAA was at 2.53. That's not elite. It's not. I still like him as a player. I'm not very optimistic about the Dallas Stars this year. Mm. And I feel, I know for sure that if you're going to be in contention for that Vezina Trophy, not only does your team have to be in contention for the postseason, but you kind of have to be carrying them to postseason contention. Now, this year will obviously be it will be his career high in number of starts. It will certainly be a career high in the number of shots he faces and everything like that. That's somebody I'd probably monitor for the first month to month and a half of the season. And if it looks like this Dallas team might be competing for a postseason spot, maybe he got off to a somewhat slow start, but they're still sticking around in that Central Division, then I would look at some odds on him. We know the way Dallas plays hockey. It's not very exciting, but it can certainly boost a goaltender's stats. And you're going to have a lot of 2-1, 3-1, 1-0 games down in Texas with that team. So I like him as maybe a mid-season pick if you can kind of get it at the right time. I think you would also probably get better odds than 20-1 if you wait till the right time as well. But one guy I've kind of had my eye on for a couple of days, if not a couple of weeks now, is Jacob Markstrom over in Calgary. He had that absurd number of shutouts last year. They improved on their defense this offseason as well with Weegar coming over. And shutouts are kind of a sexy stat to the national media, right? Even if a goaltender faces 17 shots in a night, he's still credited with the shutout, and it's certainly gonna pile on for a guy like Markstrom when you're facing teams like the San Jose Sharks and the Anaheim Ducks and the Seattle Kraken night in and night out, and you've got that elite defense in Calgary like he does. I think he can pile up a lot of shutouts again this year. I think he's going to have a low GAA again this year. As long as he stays healthy, I think he's 14-1 or plus 1,400. I think he would be my best value pick for that Vezina Trophy. He also, remember, he was projected to get a ton of starts last year before Daniel Vladar came in and played really well at first. And then once he tailed off, Markstrom started to take over the vast majority of those starts. So you see that again this year, and Markstrom's going to be up there with the rest of them in terms of the most starts among NHL goalies.
This next one is the award where I think that we could have a Florida Panther win, but there are also players in this category that are some of the elite for this position, and that's the Norris Trophy. I think of all the players who have a chance to win an award, it's Ekblad, but you still have the Cale Makars of the world, the Roman Yossi's, Victor Hedman is there. Adam Fox just won one recently. He's been in the conversation for the last few years, but he's been injury plagued the last two, and that's hurt his chances. Charlie McAvoy is going to miss the first 2 months of the season, so I'm not sure about his contention status for the Norris. Talk about Aaron Ekblad's chances to win the Norris, and who would you be eyeing for that award?
Yeah, this is probably the one award that I will stay off of this year, and I would probably advise others to stay off of completely until maybe you see an injury or something like that happen to one of those top three guys. I don't think I've ever seen a defenseman at 14-1 to win the Hart Trophy. I've certainly never seen a guy at plus 150 to win the Norris Trophy like Cale Makar is right now. I just think, it's funny you bring that up because I've thought all offseason and, when I'm looking at these futures odds, I don't think anybody can upend any of those three guys, the Makar, Yossi, and Hedman trio for contention this year, simply because those three teams are going to be competitive, Tampa, Colorado, and Nashville. Those three guys are going to be the focal points for the most part of their defensive group, and they're going to get as much power play time as any other defenseman in the NHL. So it's a tough award to bet on this year for me, simply because you never want to hope for injuries in the NHL, but I think you're going to have an injury to one of those three guys and have them miss significant time if you're going to see somebody else sneak in there and get into contention. Now, if that does happen, I think Aaron Ekblad would probably be your guy to bet on. So, he was on that. I think he probably should have been considered the Norris Trophy favorite when he went down with his injury last year. I mean, he was playing probably the best hockey of his life. The Panthers were taking over the headlines. The power play was elite, and it still was elite after he left. But he was certainly a big part of that, and he just seemed like he was making big plays left and right for that team defensively and offensively. So if you do see a guy like a Yossi or a Makar, they like to get up in the rush quite a bit, and they're obviously up in the rush behind the net even and up against the boards. If you see one of them go down with an injury, while as unfortunate as it may be, and you can get Ekblad at maybe 15-1 or even still 12-1, I think that'd be your guy, because again, this team is going to keep putting up putting up goals this year, and Ekblad is going to keep putting up points as long as he's on the ice. I think he's going to be putting up a ton of points this year. So I think as the trend grows to award defensemen with Norris Trophy awards, so long as they're putting up a ton of points, like an Erik Karlsson or a Brent Burns or a Roman Josi, I think Aaron Ekblad certainly has a choice on that offense right there. He would be, kind of the best of the rest, in my opinion, outside of those top three in terms of value for the Norris Trophy.
All right, this next one is Jack Adams. And I'll tell you the truth, I was a little shocked when I saw Paul Maurice up here at plus 1,800, because usually Jack Adams is a team that doesn't have a whole bunch of expectations and they exceed them. And this is probably something that I would stay away from as far as betting for Paul Maurice to win the Jack Adams. And it's nothing personal against Maurice. I thought that with the circumstances that happened last year with Andrew Brunette, I thought that there was a chance for him based on circumstances. But Paul Maurice, an experienced coach coming to a contending team, I'm not sure whether that results in a Jack Adams award. But here's one thing. Here's one name that I actually was thinking of, is Bruce Boudreau of the Vancouver Canucks. And I think that they're going to have a better season. Of course, they had a disastrous start last year, firing their GM, Jim Benning, and then Travis Green as well. Insert Bruce Boudreau. Is that a valid pick for the Jack Adams? And if not, what direction would you go?
I think both of those guys are valid picks. I think Boudreau is a fun one to follow. He's an entertaining guy. He's obviously in a Canadian market with what can be a really exciting team that is hoping to compete this year and improve a little bit. Just as far as the Canucks go, I'm a little bit less optimistic about them this year than maybe some others are. I just don't know that I think it's going to be a fight for the fourth spot out of four teams in that Pacific Division, right? It's going to be the Oilers, Flames, and Kings at the top three, whatever order it may be in. And then it's a fight between the Canucks and the Golden Knights to probably get that fourth spot and maybe a wild card spot. If Boudreau has them in maybe third or fourth towards the end of the season, you're absolutely going to see him as a nominee possibility for the Jack Adams. I'll tell you what, though, if I am making two bets on the Panthers this year, I'll tell you about one of them now, and we can get into the other one here in a minute. One of those is betting on Paul Maurice to win the Jack Adams at 8-1. I've already mentioned I love him as a coach. If he's able to continue or somewhat sustain that offensive output that this Panthers roster was able to put together last year, they're certainly going to keep making headlines and probably be one of the Stanley Cup favorites just in terms of the betting odds. But he's coming into a much more stable situation than he had in Winnipeg and than maybe we expected, right? I don't know what the rumors were down in South Florida, but a lot of people certainly expected Andrew Brunette to either keep the job or at least be offered a prominent assistant position under whoever the next head coach would be. And now all of a sudden he's gone and it's Paul Maurice's bench to man, and he gets to input whatever game plan he wants, whatever structure he wants. I think as long as this team, especially if this team wins the Atlantic Division against those two, those other juggernauts over there, I think Jack Adams probably should go to Paul Maurice. Again, he's a likable guy, I think, from a fan base perspective, and it seems to be from a player's perspective as well. With these Jack Adams awards, because you're not seeing what these coaches are doing on the ice every night like you are with a Norris Trophy nominee or a Hart Trophy nominee. Those storylines about each head coach kind of have to write themselves. And as long as Paul Maurice can kind of keep this boat, sailing away like it was all of last regular season, he's going to be a contender, and he's probably going to be in that top three, and he's going to be invited to the awards show. I think he should probably be the favorite over a Jared Bednar. I do think, just because Colorado is the defending Cup champions, they have probably the most talented team in the NHL already. That's not a knock against Bednar. It's just he has more to work with. And so if I had to pick a guy that or a bet that I'd make for the Panthers this year, I have two of them, and we'll get into the other one later. But one of them for right now is Paul Maurice to win that Jack Adams and Boudreau. Again, I'm not as high on the Canucks as maybe some others are. But if you just look up and down their roster, along with Boudreau, there's not many guys on that team that I would say could compete for an end of season award. Like, I don't think Thatcher Demko is necessarily going to be a Vezina candidate, but if you do like a long shot bet on the Vancouver Canucks this year, I'd say of all those guys, Bruce Boudreau, the head coach for the Jack Adams, would probably be a pretty good bet.
Since you mentioned there's another one that you would bet on as far as the Panthers, let's just get that out of the way.
Well, Matthew Tkachuk is one of my favorite players to watch in the entire NHL. BetOnline set his goals prop for the season at over or under 33.5. I believe those came out today, actually, on BetOnline. And I am going to be taking that over. I'm going to be holding on to that slip in my back pocket, and I'm going to be just waiting for the day to walk up to the register, to the window, and cash it. Over 33.5 goals for Matthew Tkachuk is one of my favorite player props I found this year. Last year, he put up 42 goals in Calgary. He's got the exact style of play for a guy who's not going to take any time to get acclimated to his new situation. I don't think he's going to have some kind of down October as he gets used to new line mates. He's going to do the exact same thing he always did in Calgary. He's going to tick off other fan bases and players. He's going to be he's going to be a really, really elite 5v5, possession player. And, frankly, as far as the power play goes as well, I think he's going to be what they need as a net front presence. The guy has some of the best hands in hockey. He just might not be doing it at the same, sprint speed or skating speed as a Connor McDavid or an Austin Matthews. He's over there. He's scoring goals between his legs on a nightly basis. I've grown up as a Nashville Predators fan, and I live here in Nashville. And last year, he scored a goal between his legs skating through the slot at about full speed, and he won a game in overtime. He's got all the talent in the world, not only in his own right, but also on the lines around him. I really think Paul Maurice is going to envision this guy as kind of the A+ version, or the better version of what Patrick Hornquist was probably supposed to be, and at times was, for the Panthers as that net front presence on the power play. You already had a top 5, top 3 power play in hockey last year with this team. I think you're adding a top 5 or top 3 power play specialist to this team. He's going to have all the motivation in the world with a new team as well. Not to mention, given what his old coach Daryl Sutter said about him the other day about not having a Stanley Cup. He's an emotional player, and I think he's one of those guys who can kind of harness that in a positive way. 42 goals last year. Maybe he doesn't score 42, but do I think he's going to drop off by 9 goals? Absolutely not. He's going to hit 35 with ease. It's just a question of whether or not he goes over 40. If I had to make one bet on a Panther this year, even before Paul Maurice to win the Jack Adams, I'm going to be taking that Matthew Tkachuk over 33.5 goals. I'm taking it straight to the bank. It's one of my favorite player props I've found this year.
And that being in at age 24 and just entering his prime, his chances of getting over 33 you got to feel confident about that. That's for sure. But
yeah, absolutely. He's got the new contract, and if you're really interested in betting him, or even just betting odds or betting long shots, he's 50 to 1 or plus 5,000 to win the Hart Trophy as well. And I know he's going to have to kind of share the limelight with Alexander Barkov and Sam Reinhart and Aaron Ekblad a little bit. But that guy, he changes the dynamic of a team, and he changes the dynamic of every single game. He can flip a game on its head whether it's by scoring a goal, by fighting somebody, or just by mucking it up after the whistle. He's really one of the most well-rounded players in all of hockey. So, it's a pretty fun bet, but I think it's the right one.
Absolutely. And I think I have another one that I would be very confident about taking an over or under about. So I'm going to ask you that next in the next segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to this special edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, a betting special for the show. And Jack, going back to point totals for the NHL and a player that I looked at, of course, for the Panthers, Alexander Barkov, his over-under for points was 87.5, while he was at a 110-point pace last year. That's the first player I want to talk about. For that one, I would definitely take the over. But this other player that's not a Panther, in Chris Kreider, who had a career season, his over under was at 66. What are the chances that he repeats that again? And for me, that's something that I would take the under on. Your thoughts on Barkov for the Panthers and Chris Kreider for the New York Rangers?
Yeah, Barkov, the issue is certainly, or the concern is certainly not talent. It's certainly not line mates. It's certainly not his role in the offense. It's all about his health. Just let's see, he's played one full season. Just looking at his career right now, he's played one full season in the NHL so far. He came close in 2017, 2018 with 79 games. But other than that, he's missed 15 to 20 games kind of per year with an injury throughout his career. That'd be my only concern. But even then, if you've got, what was it, 87.5 on his points prop for the year, I think that's what you said. Even then, last year he missed 15 games and still beat that over. So the only other real concern, or just kind of thing to monitor, thing to keep an eye on and to dig into a little bit, if I were you, before making a bet like that, is he did have a career high in shooting percentage last year. Typically you expect those shooting percentages after a big year, after a big stretch of goal scoring, to regress back to whatever their career average is, unless there is some kind of evidence that the player changed his game a little bit. Barkov has a career shooting percentage of around 14 to 14.5%, and last year he was scoring goals on over 18% of his shots on net. That's a pretty high jump from his career average. It's not insane, but it's pretty high. It seems like he still drove possession and drove the play as well as ever. And, it wasn't some kind of anomaly, but I would expect maybe a little bit, a couple fewer goals this year. He had 39 in 67 games last year. That's one of the best in the league, aside from Austin Matthews, who was just on another level last year. I think you might expect a couple of less goals, maybe down to 35, maybe 33, somewhere around there. But there's nothing to say he's not going to have as many assists this year offensively, right? That power play, again, is expected to be just as lethal as it was last year. He's got equally good, if not better, line mates coming into this season. I just worry about the goals dropping off just a little bit and regressing back to kind of what his average would be. If you could find maybe an over or under on his number of assists, I'd be interested in hearing about that. He's one of those guys too, where his impact seems to be felt and noticed, not just in his points and his point production. He's obviously known as kind of the leader of that team. He's been there for so long. He's kind of brought the Panthers on the map. Every year in and year out, he's considered the most underrated player in hockey, to the point where this year he's probably properly rated as a top 7 or 8 player in hockey. So, if you're interested in Barkov and maybe playing a season future on him, and maybe to even account for his injuries just a little bit, you can look into him at winning the Hart Trophy at 22-1, rather than maybe that points prop, only because I worry about his shooting percentage coming back down to earth just a little bit and potentially missing 10 to 15 games. As far as Kreider, he's a guy that I, along with probably most other sports bettors, or at least NHL bettors who like jumping on these player props, has been eyeing for the entire offseason. What did you say his points prop was at, or his goals prop?
60. His point over under was 66.5.
Yeah, that's an under for me. I don't know about you. I do want to get your thoughts on a guy like Kreider, but that's an under for me. I mean, 26 power play goals last year. He scored 52 goals, and he was scoring in one in every 5 shots on net. Even before then, he had never put up over, I'm looking through his season by season, he had never put up over 55 points in his season before, let alone 60. So, he's on a team in the Rangers that I don't think is going to be as good this year as they were last year. They didn't really improve the forward group a whole lot this offseason. Yeah, maybe they might go out and get a Patrick Kane, but I'm not going to handicap my New York Rangers futures on the possibility, on the 10% possibility that they go out and get a Patrick Kane and improve their power play even more. It was 20.2% was his shooting percentage last year. That's just not sustainable. Even for a guy who has a career average shooting percentage up near 15%, you're never going to see a 20.2% shooting percentage ever again. He's obviously a power play specialist. He's not scoring a ton of goals at 5v5 or any shorthanded goals. In fact, he used to be known as one of the fastest skaters in all of hockey. And since his injury issues, he's certainly lost a step. I think he really benefited from that power play unit last year. In fact, he was the majority of the power play unit, quite frankly, outside of Artemi Panarin maybe. But I'm glad you brought that up. It's certainly an underplay for me. Whether he gets off to a slow start or this Rangers power play gets off to a slow start, either way, he's going to feel the effects of it. And he's obviously not a guy that's going out there putting up 70 assists a year. He's not much of a passer. Even last year he had only 25 assists to 52 goals. So that's absolutely an under I'd be looking at. It's just not sustainable. It's not realistic. I think I'd be fading Chris Kreider a little bit this year.
Mm-hmm. So a few more before we get out of here. Calder, really, there all the players for the Panthers who would probably compete for the Calder were last year with Spencer Knight and Anton Lundell. Anton Lundell, he missed a handful of games, and Spencer Knight spent a lot of time in the AHL last year. So Calder contention was never really a thing for the Panthers, and it's going to be the same way likely this year. Some of the favorites are Mason McTavish and Owen Power, who is up there. But what are the chances of someone like a Shane Wright, who slipped in the draft the first 4 spots, that he could go on a tear in year one, for wanting to prove people wrong about where he should have been drafted?
Yeah, that was almost an awkward storyline a little bit after the draft. He had been just the consensus number 1 pick for so long that, all of a sudden, a couple of months before the draft, it seemed like he was falling a little bit in draft boards, and it was almost like somebody who had the 4th or 5th overall pick was leaking some bad news about him or some bad film about him to get him to drop to him or something, because he's still just as talented as ever. And obviously with the draft being in Montreal, you kind of expected him to be drafted by his hometown team, and he gives them that glare from the stage and whatever that drummed up drama was. But he's sitting at 22-1 right now, plus 2,200. It's an interesting bet. I'll tell you though, the only thing that is keeping me from betting on him is the same thing keeping me from betting on Matty Beniers to win the Calder Trophy. It's tough to kind of just compete with your own teammate for media attention every year, especially when you're probably not going to be on a very competitive team this year either. Beniers obviously has higher odds, so if you're just looking on betting on a Kraken player, then Shane Wright might be the guy. He obviously has the motivation after everything you already mentioned. I just don't know if I could lock in either of those guys, because as soon as Matty Beniers puts up a 3-4 point game, Shane Wright might go out and score a hat trick the next night. And so you're these guys are kind of almost playing against each other, playing against yourselves a little bit for Calder Trophy contention. At least Beniers, if I remember correctly, got a couple of games of experience at the NHL level. So, that might be understandable as to why he's got such high odds. But Shane Wright certainly is more recognizable, in my opinion, because he's kind of been the talk of hockey draft world for the last couple of years, up until he was drafted, and now it's Connor Bedard. That's the next big thing. So I'd personally hold off on Shane Wright. I like the storyline. That's always the good part about that kind of bet, is the storyline is already there. If he comes out this year and puts up 70 to 75 points, then you'd almost consider him a lock for the top 3, if not the top 1 or 2 for the Calder Trophy. A guy I really like is Marco Rossi at 14-1, though, if you want to get some kind of long shot odds. Wild forward who's ultra talented. He's joining a lineup and a forward group too that's very flexible, and has the opportunity to move guys up and down the lineup. He's probably going to start on the 4th line there, but their first line center right now is Ryan Hartman. And so it's not like he going from a fourth line center to a Ryan Hartman is that big of a jump. They lose Kevin Fiala this year on the wing. So they're probably going to be trying out him, Marco Rossi and Matt Boldy, along with these other guys on the wing and the power play for significant power play time this year as well. The Wild are obviously going to be competitive, I think, for the Central Division, and so there's going to be more eyeballs on him from voters and the awards voters throughout the regular season into February and March, when maybe less people are watching the Kraken and getting less attention on a Matty Beniers or a Shane Wright or even an Owen Power in Buffalo or a Mason McTavish in Anaheim. Marco Rossi, if you just look at the odds there for the Calder Trophy, everybody in front of him or everybody who has higher odds than him is on a team that I think even Vegas is projecting will miss the playoffs. So that's just something to keep in mind on Rossi. He's got the 7th or 8th highest odds, and just about everybody in front of him at least projects to be out of the playoffs by late March or early April. And if by that point Marco Rossi can kind of slide up into the top 6 for Minnesota, his name's certainly going to be up there for contention for the Calder. I think if I had to place a bet on one guy to win the Calder this year, it'd probably be Rossi.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Daily Faceoff right now. It has Marco Rossi centering Matthew Boldy, a young player, and Freddie Gaudreau there. So maybe if you see this guy in the top 6 and seeing the chemistry with another young player on his line, hey, that could definitely increase his chances of winning. This last one is the first coach fired in the NHL, and surprisingly, it has Sheldon Keefe as the favorite, the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He got an extension like 2 off seasons ago that would probably expire this season, but it's really a trial and error period still for this core. There's still questions about how John Tavares fits with the Toronto Maple Leafs as well, about living up to his contract, even though John Tavares' injury right now is not going to last long for Toronto. But as the favorite to be the first coach fired, I'm not really sure. And I think of someone like Lindy Ruff in New Jersey. There's been so much noise all offseason. And I think, and of course, I'm going to emphasize this more because it's a Florida Panthers show, Andrew Brunette was brought there for a reason. He has the interim coach experience from his time last year in Florida. Am I crazy for thinking that Andrew Brunette could get another interim head coach job sooner rather than later, as if Lindy Ruff is the guy that you would be more confident in, or is there someone else?
No, you're absolutely not crazy in thinking that. In fact, I think if you could get in the head of the Devils front office right now, that's exactly what their logic was in bringing Brunette in. If I actually was talking about this on the Locked On Devils podcast the other day, I think if there was a bet I was going to make on the Devils this year, it's probably on Lindy Ruff to be the first coach fired at plus 750. I mean, you look at the 2 guys in front of him, Sheldon Keefe is the favorite. I feel like the Leafs have gone through so many head coaches in the last 15 years as if the head coach is the problem. I don't think it's the head coach that's the problem. Now, goaltending, bad goaltending gets coaches fired. That's the age-old saying. And they don't necessarily have a solid goaltending group in Toronto. So I guess I get that. And they've got their sense of urgency. But then you look, Dave Haxtell in Seattle is the next highest odds to get fired. I don't see that personally either, simply because there's not that sense of urgency to be super competitive this year. They know they're going to be mixing in a Shane Wright and a Matty Beniers to try to get them experience this year, and maybe next offseason is their big offseason. They struck out on Nazem Kadri and John Klingberg, so you can't have the highest expectations for them this year in Seattle. Lindy Ruff is absolutely a name I'd be worried about, or I might be interested in, I guess, if I'm throwing money on it, but maybe worried about if I'm a Devils fan. He and one other one that I'll bring up in a minute, but Ruff is at plus 750. You hit it on the head. They brought in Andrew Brunette for a reason. And Andrew Brunette took that job for a reason. He didn't take that job because he thought Lindy Ruff was going to be around forever and this Devils team was, it was all shiny coming into the season as if they're going to compete for the lead in the Metro throughout the year. I think he knows that the clock is ticking on Ruff. They obviously have that sense of urgency this year. With some of the moves they made in the offseason. Yes, they struck out on Johnny Gaudreau, but that certainly was supposed to be the icing on the cake, not the new core that they were going to build around and be competitive with in a couple of years. It's not in addition to that too, it's one thing to bring in a guy who has head coaching experience like a Brunette. It's a completely different thing to bring in a guy who has very successful head coaching experience. No matter interim or permanent head coach, Andrew Brunette took that Panthers team to a President's Trophy and to the lead in the Eastern Conference last year. So they know what they probably have in him. They might know what they have in Lindy Ruff at this point. Frankly, I don't think Ruff has much left on him. And this is one of those teams that, again, they got off to a really slow start last year. And personally, I thought going into this offseason that they were going to mutually agree to part ways, or they were going to terminate Ruff. But they didn't. And I guess the players came to bat for him, but the players can only come to bat for a head coach for so long. You've seen it throughout the NHL for years. That Devils front office is obviously not afraid to make a move. I think if they were going to make a move this year, if they got off to a slow start, it'd be Ruff to be the first one to go. So that's a good call. I do like that bet. Another one I'm interested in too is DJ Smith in Ottawa. Kind of a similar situation, but he doesn't have that prominent, or at least recency bias is certainly a thing, but that well-known assistant coach behind the bench with him. I just think last year was a year where Ottawa expected to be more competitive than they were. And I heard some rumors that Smith had kind of disappointed the front office, and while the Ottawa front office has been in kind of in flux and in scandals for the last couple of years, they certainly weren't happy with the on ice product, and they thought about making a change at some point in the regular season. He's at 16-1 as well. Again, they made those big free agent signings in the offseason and big trades in the offseason for DeBrincat and Claude Giroux. They're expecting to be competitive this year. And if they get off to some kind of slow start again, now that they've invested tens of millions of dollars into these two guys, I think DJ Smith could be one of the first ones to go. So I'd look at that one along with Ruff. I think those are probably very likely one of the first two head coaches fired this year.
Mm-hmm. And a different vibe going on in Ottawa now, not only with those on ice moves with, like you said, DeBrincat, Giroux, but what's been going on with ownership as well about the transfer of power there. The situation with the new downtown arena that they could possibly have as well. And with that is going to come a little bit of heightened expectations for the Ottawa Senators as well. I think they are taking a next step, but I'm not sure if it's playoffs, but I think they are taking a step, and I'm excited for I'm just excited for Tkachuk versus Tkachuk in the regular season. I think it's going to be a game of grab your popcorn and just watch these two guys go after each other. I at media day I asked Matthew Tkachuk about communication with his brother, how much he's going to be chatting up with him before matchups or even throughout the season, and he's like, they're still cheering each other on, but when they're on the ice they just want to beat each other up. So it's going to be definitely fun to watch Ottawa, but definitely now that you mentioned one of the first coaches and the heightened expectations, DJ Smith is definitely one to definitely keep an eye on. But Jack, I want to thank you so much for jumping on this special edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you so much for maybe people can make a little bit of money this season on their NHL bets. So tell everybody where they can find you online.
Yeah, this is going to be an awesome hockey season. I've been waiting for this for months, and now all of a sudden it's crept up on us. Each of the last 2 years, we've landed first overall over at covers.com on their leaderboard of 40 NHL handicappers, and we're going for the top spot again this year. We've had a lot of success with it. So we actually grade our plays on a 10 to 50 unit scale. 50 unit being a max wager, and we had one 50 unit max wager last year in the futures area, and that was on the Coyotes under 69.5 regular season points. We also had a Stanley Cup future on the Colorado Avalanche at plus 550. So we had a great year last year. If you want to get signed up before the season, you'll get a full card of preseason futures bets, as well as all of our picks through the Stanley Cup Finals for just $797. Give us a visit at ParamountSports.com. Give myself a follow, as well as Lee Sterling. My Twitter is on the bottom of Paramount NHL, and then Lee Sterling, who oversees the operation here, he's at Paramount Sports. If you want to give us a call and you have questions about betting on hockey or joining us and signing up for a package, give us a call at the office as well. We're a go 24/7. We're happy to answer questions and get you signed up. Our office number is 800-400 800-400-9741. That's 800-400-9741. And if I leave you guys with anything tonight, it's to make sure you bet Matthew Tkachuk over 33.5 goals this year.
And make sure to also subscribe to the podcast Locked On Bets with Lee Sterling and your boy Q, where they'll be talking about all prop bets throughout the year as well. So, Jack, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steve Roden, where they'll be covering all the preseason activities around the National Hockey League. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to listen to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a 30-minute podcast every Monday through Friday on all things National Hockey League. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. So I'm Armando Velez with Jack Bond. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.